I'd like to get something that I could have programmable settings, but that would probably get into a huge, big kind of thing. Very expensive. All right. We're starting into something new. Uh-oh. Does anybody have a copy of the profile sheet? Yeah, the index. Great. We're moving into a new section in that. We're moving down to the second big space here, the opportunity tests and profiles. And tonight we're just going to look at the first ones, the 5, 6, and 7 profiles, and we're going to discuss the ideas behind them, and then the next time we'll do the other 3, and then we'll start going into 2 application sections. All right, we're going to look at opportunity profiles. Philosophically and psychologically, opportunities are a little bit more difficult to conceive of than attitude profiles. At least they are for me. Because we all know that we have our own field of moods and attitudes, and we can see that the horoscope is pretty good in showing those fields. And we also realize that there are moods and attitudes of the times. We know, like, there are certain times that had a certain prevailing attitude about them. With a little bit of observation, by watching the transiting planets or the ephemeral planets, we can see what the attitude of the times is like, and we can do the same thing by just looking at the horoscope. We can see what the personal field of attitudes. So it's not difficult to see that we have a personal micro-environment of attitude, and that little micro-environment of attitude we carry around in a macro-environment of attitude for the whole world or for the whole solar system. They both are universal, but we can see that one is small or microcosmic and one is macrocosmic. So it's easy to see why attitude profiles work. But the idea that we carry opportunities around with us just like we carry attitudes around with us is a little bit more difficult to conceive and accept. Now, the mundane houses, as they are called in astrology, represent fields of attitude. And the mundane houses, geometrically, are divisions of the heavens relative to the birthplace on earth, whereas the signs are divisions of the heavens relative to a point in space. They're more heavenly. The signs are more celestial, and the houses are more terrestrial. This works out such that the signs have more to do with our spiritual life, our attitudes of thought and emotion, the flavors of things that we experience inwardly, and the houses have more to do with material form, the form right here on earth, the form of our experience. So they're both parts of our character, but the forms are much more mundane. If we think about it in another way, the flavor of the grape juice or the pineapple juice is like the signs, and the houses are more like the goblet or the glass that we put them in. I suppose pineapple juice in a brandy sniffer might be a nice thing. I don't know. I've never tried it. Sometimes we like to think of ourselves or conceive of ourselves more in terms of spiritual things. We sometimes think that our bodies, we close our eyes and we go through our moods and our attitudes, our bodies seem extraneous or adventitious or unnecessary or something like that. To some extent, this is true. Our true nature really is more inward and spiritual. But it is also true that we are dependent for our experience of our moods right now. We're dependent on the body, and we're dependent on this world. And in this world, form is preeminent. Even social forms are preeminent. So, all of these things of the world are necessary for our awakening and for our growth. And it seems like the more we have knocked around with the forms of the world, the more awake we are inwardly. At least that's my experience of life. So, right now, we need form and the experience of form. To some extent, our conscious life and our waking consciousness are almost preoccupied with form. So a good degree of our character development is a consequence of our interaction with form or forms. Now, when the essence of form is absorbed and assimilated into our spiritual character, it's very much abstracted. We can't take this body or the shape of this room or such like that as it is into the spiritual worlds. It has to be abstracted. So if we think on the basis of this abstraction that forms have to live exclusively outside of us, when we can have an abstract idea, such like a blueprint or something like that, if we think that the opportunities or the forms or the essential source of them is external, that's something of an illusion. Now, psychologically, we know we can project an attitude from ourselves, and when we do that, we project it onto someone else, and we think that they're the one with the problem, when really it is us that has the problem, and there is that phenomenon of projection. It should then be equally possible to project the abstract form of opportunities onto the world. And that seems to be what happens. It's like we carry around this whole idea that we project onto the world and we see opportunities. Thus one person will see a situation and they'll see an opportunity in it, and the other person will not see it because they're not so good at being awake to the whole concept of opportunity being applied to the external world from an abstract inner consciousness. It's a lot of what waking up to the world is. Now, this kind of projection doesn't have to be pathological. Very often we can see a mood in nature, and that mood in nature is not a pathological projection from us. If it were, then every poet would be pathological. There are a lot of people who think that way. Poets really are not pathological. So, in a way, we do carry our opportunities and our forms, or the forms of the world around us, we do carry them inside of us. And with this kind of realization helps us really to appreciate the abstract nature of the mundane houses. They seem to be exterior, and the forms of the world seem to be in the world, and the world does have its form just like the world has its attitudes. But those forms in the world are also in us, and that's precisely why we can see them. I don't know, but some ways when I think about it, In our body, the sense of touch is the only sense that has been universalized, so that we feel all over with our body. There are experiments that you can do. There are some areas in the center of the back where inwardly you feel a pin, but the pin is as much as, I think, an inch away from where you're actually feeling it. The sensation is not so well generalized on the back. So I don't know why strokes in the back feel so good if they're if they're not so well generalized, but that is the way it works. If you need better notes for lights, just touch that light bulb above you. Not hard, but just touch it and it'll go on. He's just as happy probably to not have them. But somehow this whole idea of universalization of form through the sense of touch in the body seems to have something to do with the same kind of universalization of the idea of an external form of opportunity to the world. But it's just a feel. So we see organization in forms in the world around us all the time, and probably one of the best ones is the branching of a tree, either in its branches or in its roots. Now that is a very obvious kind of hierarchical structure. We also can see structures in social organization. It might not always be like the matchings of the NCAA March Madness, which is coming up soon. The brackets of a basketball tournament, or the seedings of a tennis tournament, or something like that. But invisibly, there are social structures, and those structures are not always charted out for us, but they are there. And very often, social structure is quite abstract. Anthropologists who study various societies say, yes, there is a structure, but it's internalized. Who was it? Thomas Jefferson felt that the best laws for governing people were not external laws. He thought that the best laws were internal laws. And this is why he thought that the Native Americans governed themselves better than the white people, because everybody in the Native American community had internally within themselves the mores and the laws and the codes of behavior, and they didn't have to obey external laws because they knew internally what they were. They had it all inside of them. And so the forms of behavior in some societies are more internal than they are external. Unfortunately, in the case of Native Americans or people who are very tribalized, the reason they have the laws internally is because there is an internal tribal spirit that carries over them, and it's much harder with individual people. And until we have cosmic principles like altruism and respect and things like that internalized inside of ourselves, I think we have to rely on external laws until everybody can live in that way. All right. So we're back to looking at horoscopic space. And we've got to do the same thing we did all over again. We're going to divide the horoscope, only this time, instead of dividing horoscopes relative to the signs, we're going to do it relative to the houses. We are, again, going to make tests, and from those tests we're going to draw profiles. Now, the last time we started looking at space with the attitude profiles, we said that space could be divided two ways, at least in balance. We said that they could be divided contiguously, or they could be divided non-contiguously. And when we're talking about dividing space, we're talking about dividing space in no smaller units than complete houses, because they're sort of atomic. There are smaller subdivisions, like into duads, which are half houses or half signs, and there are decans, which are thirds of signs or houses, and there are smaller divisions, like the terms that are on the signs in the chart here, But, and they're even unbalanced, but things get very, very complicated. So we're just doing really simple stuff here. Now, when we looked at the signs, we decided to do only balanced, non-contiguous divisions of space. We divided things into poles or polarities of odds and evens, and we divided things into the triplicities, the quadruplicities, the cardinal, fixed, and common signs, and we divided them in triplicities, the elements, fire, earth, air, and water. Now, we didn't do contiguous division. And the reason we didn't do contiguous division is because I find that those things usually don't work, or they don't work significantly. There are differences between babies born in summer and babies born in winter, but those differences are so slight that they usually don't make much difference. We're at the time of the year now where that is February is partial to genius, and that more geniuses are born, IQ geniuses are born in February than any other month. Now, aren't you sorry that you made it, that you had to wait until March to get to be born? Yeah. But with opportunity tests and profiles, I find out that it does work. That if we look at dividing space contiguously by space, into different sectors that show contiguous space, it really works, provided we're balanced. So we're going to spend all of the rest of the night talking about philosophies and means of discussing contiguous divisions of space. And you'll find out that they're really, really quite helpful. First, we'll start all over the same simple stuff. This will be the last time we'll be running through this because the next bank of tests are altogether different. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to divide the space, horoscope space, into hemispheres, limiting ourselves to complete houses. There are 6 hemispheres we could use. We could use this cusp and have the hemisphere above and below, or we could use this cusp and the hemisphere above and below, or this one and the hemisphere above and below, or this one and to this side and that side, and the same thing with this cusp. There are, so there are 6 poles that run through the horoscope, and so there are 6 different ways that you can break it into hemispheres. The question becomes, how does one choose, or does one do 6 different tests? And that's a problem. And one of the big problems is an attitude problem. Most people, it seems especially men, who get involved in astrology get caught up in systems. Sometimes it is people who are misfits that get involved with astrology because they are so nerdy and system-oriented that they become misfits, and in their misfit nature they become sensitized, and then when they're sensitized they're open to things like astrology. And in that sensitized misfit state, they find it easier to get lost in astrological systems than to actually study and appreciate character and do something with it. So there are all kinds. You don't have to read many astrological books to determine that there are people that are trying to wow you with their misfitness by showing you all kinds of constructs and models and mechanisms and schema and paradigms and whatever you can think of for abstract ways of looking at astrology. It happens. It's all right to have a system. And it's all right to try all kinds of different systems, because sometimes it's hard to get out a horoscope. And if you try this and you try that, you start making breakthroughs and you can get into things. The real problem is when you make a system into a religion, you get into you get into competitions of systems. The reason I'm laughing is that different things come to mind in all of this. We had this strange grad student at one time who liked to read. For a physicist, he was very unusual because he liked to read things like William Burroughs. And I don't know if you know who William Burroughs is. He's that man that took all of those drugs that was heir to the Burroughs Foundation, the Burroughs Corporation money. He got all that money and he spent all of his life taking drugs. I think he's still around yet. He was a big influence on the Beats. And his famous statement is, language is the virus of the mind. And he did very zany kinds of things. And this grad student, rather than studying quantum theory and things like that, was reading William Burroughs. And they had a meeting over in Hawaii. We had this experiment over in Hawaii that they were trying to find gamma ray bursts from X-ray stars with a telescope. And the scientists were competing with each other, and they invited this guy to take the notes for the meeting, and so he decided to be literalistic about it. And so the secretaries are typing up the notes that he took, and he says, Professor X tells Professor Y to stop banging his cock on the table. And that's what came to mind when I was thinking about competing. They get really serious about this, about what statistical approach should you use when applying a Rayleigh analysis to picking a needle out of a haystack. And they'll argue vigorously. That's what they're trying to do, because there's all kinds of light that gets scattered, and it's hard to pick out what is a signal if there is a burst that is coming, and that's called Rayleigh analysis, and it's a complicated, And so you can get, when you get into religions, most systems are artificial. Now, I myself have been very much inclined towards systems. I have Virgo rising, which is in itself pretty nerdy, and I have a very strong theoretical Mercury, which expands all of those things to, almost like a mania for systems. But so, what we're going to look at are not systems, but they're various means for telling the validity or telling the nature of something. And a lot of what we're going to do tonight are methods of analogies that apply to everything in astrology, and they apply to a lot of things in life. And it's a very important thing for looking at systems of observation. All right. The first way of deciding which hemispheres we're going to use is as a direct analogy from nature. Now, the houses are divisions of space relative to the birthplace. The simplest form of houses is to draw a circle on the ground at the birthplace and divide it into 12, with the cusp running between the 4th house and the 10th house pointing straight south. And if you just take and draw that on the ground, and you just take the lines and extend them up the space, you can do it with a sextant, and read on the zodiac where they hit. You have a tables of houses right there. So you're dividing the the heavens relative to the earth. Now, due to the obliquity of the Earth's orbit, and due to the part of the Earth that you're on, if you divide the houses and see where things hit the zodiac, some of the houses, in terms of the signs, are going to be larger than 30 degrees, even though from on Earth they look like they're 30 degrees apart. But so they may appear to vary in size, but the most significant points are the same no matter what. Now, if we look, the sun is the most significant heavenly body in our lives. Our whole lives are ruled. All of the energy, our life comes from the sun. Now, relative to any birthplace, there are 4 places where the sun is exceptionally different. It makes a change of state. One of those is sunrise. I can remember being on the desert and being on the desert all night at a campfire, and if your only heat is a direct heat, like from a campfire, if you face the campfire, your front side is warm, but your backside shivers. So if you turn your backside, so if you spend an entire night at a campfire, you find yourself facing to and away from the fire all night long. And I can remember standing on the desert right at sunrise after having been up all night, and when the sun comes up, it's an amazing difference. Even twilight, the difference between twilight and first real light is a big difference in light and in warmth, because there's so much warmth that comes from the sun, and yes, it is direct warmth, but it's wraparound, and it's immediately warm. The second point is noon. At noon, the insolation is the highest. The shadows change. There's the least amount of shadow at noon than from any other time of the day. And the energies shift. We know the story in King Arthur's Knights that Sir Gawain could always fight, and he could fight fiercely until noon, and then he'd decline. It's obviously a solar analogy. At sunset, things change also. There is a difference in light, but even our bodies respond differently. Instead of having the inner heat, outer heat, we have inner heat. If you're sick, immediately after sunset, your fever goes up. You can try it again and again and again. It's an experiment that is always there. Fevers and illnesses become stronger at sunset. Obviously, the other point is midnight. At midnight, things turn around. There's actually a phenomenon that at midnight that is there like no other time. It's called zodiacal light, such that if you're out in a very dark area, like a desert, at midnight, if you look straight up at the ecliptic in the midheaven, you'll see a faint blush of light. And that blush of light is exactly opposite of where the sun is. And it's called zodiacal light. It's a rare thing these days because there's so much light pollution that you don't often see it. However, if you get out in the Oregon Pike Cactus National Monument, which is miles away from any light pollution, and the air is exceedingly clear, you can see zodiacal light. It's a nice thing to see. Everybody should see Mercury at least once in their life and know it. In the ancient times, they said that anybody who saw Mercury and knew it was a wise man, because you had to know about all the orbits in order to do it. I saw something that I'll never ever see again in my life. I saw all 7 naked eye visible bodies within 2 minutes. How did it go? Jupiter was on the descendant, and Mars was in the 8th house. Saturn, I believe, was in the 9th. The Moon was in the 10th. Mercury was in the 11th. Venus was in the 11th, and Mercury was in the 12th. I stood out here on the railroad track, and you could really see the ecliptic just by following the stars. You could see the perfect line. You just like connect the dots. And 2 minutes after Jupiter set, the sun came up. So I saw all 7 visibles within 2 minutes' time. I'll never see it again. At least I'll never see them spread out evenly like that. It was like very. But at any rate, we have 4 points: the eastern horizon for sunrise, midnight, noon for the midheaven, the western horizon for sunset, and the nadir for midnight. Now, indirectly, we can do the same thing, because all of the houses are abstractions of the signs. Like Aries is the first sign, and the thrust of early childhood is the first house. Taurus is the sign of acquisitions, and the second house is the opportunity to acquire things. So if we follow the sun through the zodiacs, we get something similar. When the sun enters Aries is spring, and when the days become longer than the nights. And when the sun enters Cancer, it's the summer solstice, and the days are the longest, and from then they start diminishing. And at the autumnal equinox, when the sun enters Libra, is when the nights start becoming longer than the days, and at the winter solstice, when the sun enters Capricorn, is when the nights are the longest and the days are the shortest. And in that indirect method, the points on the houses that represent those points in the signs, the way the chart is set up right now, it's the same 4 points. And these then represent the primary axes. They're called the primary angles. And so they represent the most significant hemispheres. Coincidentally, they happen to be very important as the vertical and the horizontal. You might say that on the horizontal, you have the greatest amount of gravitational friction. But as a consequence, you have the greatest amount of thrust because you have all of that traction. On the vertical, you have the least amount of friction, but you have the least amount of gravitational friction, and so you're falling or you're trying to rise. So they are important in terms of mechanics in the earth. The horizontal is where we have equal footing. We're on a level with everyone else. What do they say now in the lingo? They say leveling the playing field so that everybody has the same equal circumstances. And we have the vertical, who's above who. How do we say it? Low man on the totem pole. Or we say he's on top of everything. So this gives us 2 sets of hemispheres. We're going to use those 2 sets of hemispheres for understanding opportunities. If we're looking south, the hemisphere that is in the heavens when we're looking south, that runs from the 7th house through the 12th house, is called the southern hemisphere. The hemisphere that is below the earth or behind us as we're looking south, that is from the 1st house through the 6th house, is called the northern hemisphere. Since we're facing south, everything to the left of the midheaven and nadir is called the eastern hemisphere, and everything to the right of the pole that runs from the midheaven to the nadir is called the western hemisphere. It is those 4 hemispheres that we're going to look at. All right, now we're ready to start looking at, this is tedious. Huh? I enjoy all the system kind of things, but I think it might be a little tedious from other people. All right, let's look at the southern versus the northern hemisphere. That's what where did I put did I give it back to you? I did. All right. That's what in the vertical, the first test, yes, it's called the vertical test. And you count the number of planets north versus the number of planets that are south. All right, we're going to use a number of different types of analysis in order to understand the hemispheres and then put them all together and come up with a composite. The first is the direct method from nature. We've been looking at that already. This is a very distinct difference. It's the difference between day and night. When the sun is in the south, it's day. When the sun is in the north, it's night. When the sun is in the south, things are illumined. And we work on things outside of ourselves. When the sun is in the north, we turn inward. We withdraw. We sleep. We take care of our household things. So there's a distinct difference between the natural activities of when the sun is in the northern versus when it's in the southern hemisphere. The second method is the indirect method, and that is following the sun through the signs of the zodiac. But in that case, there is a difference. When the sun is in the northern signs, that is, Aries through Virgo, you would think that it is like the day houses. In some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't, because there is a crossover or an inversion of some kind. For example, in summer, again, thinking in terms of nature, we have to stay where our crops are. It's a very local kind of thing. All weather forecasting is done on the basis of the fourth house, or quite a bit of it is based on the fourth house because that's the local area. So there's something very local about the houses that relate to the summer signs. The outer things have to be taken care of. However, in the wintertime, there's a withdrawal, but it's a withdrawal from the work of nature. We obviously have more insecurities because we don't know whether it's ever going to get warm again and whether there's going to be enough food to go around. But nonetheless, we turn ourselves more to educational things, to cultural things, and things of the world in wintertime. So there is a quality about the southern hemisphere that is a much more universal cultural kind of thing. In fact, this bears out that I won't go into that. It's too much of a side trip. All right, the next way of analysis is called bonds and heart analysis, or bounds and heart analysis. Now, several years ago, some of you were in a course that we did that we took several years at it. It was a very, very deep and complex course only on aspects. And we talked about any region of space that had boundaries was called a bounded region. And that there are ways that you can understand a bounded region. The hemisphere is a bounded region. It's bounded either by the horizontal or by the vertical. And the way you can tell the nature of a bounded region is by looking at the bounds of it and at the heart of it. So if we look at the northern hemisphere, it begins with the first house. And the first house is the personality. So we can say that the leading edge bound is extremely personal. The trailing edge bound is at the end of Virgo. Virgo is service, and service does involve other people, but it's personal service. It's voluntary service. So the Aries tendency has waned some, but it's still personal. When we look at the heart, and the heart is, the leading edge and the heart especially, are the most important parts of understanding a bounded region. And the heart is of the northern hemisphere, is the cusp of the fourth house. And that is the place of the greatest personal withdrawal and the place of the greatest subjectivity. Now, in the same way that the first house is me first, the leading edge of the southern hemisphere is the seventh house, which is other-oriented. It's you first. It's the putting of the person aside for the sake of the other. It is like Libra, always being an alter ego. The trailing edge is at the end of Pisces. And there is complete abandon of self for the others or for the all until like destiny forces one back into personal existence again. So there is something that is very other-oriented about the southern hemisphere, especially when we get to the 10th house, which is probably the most objective place in the horoscope. It's like being on the top of the mountain and everybody can see you from every side of the mountain, and that's the only place that can happen. All right, now there's one more kind of analysis that we have. We're going along here pretty well. This is going to go very fast. One other kind of analysis, and that is an accentuation and a deficiency analysis. That is what sorts of things are accentuated in a region and what things are deficient. If we look, there are two fiery sign houses in the northern hemisphere, two earthy sign houses in the northern hemisphere, and only one air and one water. So you could say then that the fire and earth sign houses are accentuated and the air and the water are deficient. And together that gives you sort of a feel of it all. So, from the fire sign accentuation, we get something of, since the fire sign houses have something to do with self-assertion and self-expression, that gives it a very self-expressive kind of character to the southern hemisphere, northern hemisphere, I'm sorry. The earth sign houses put an emphasis on personal work or responsibility or the forms of things. So that shows an accentuation of that. The air sign houses represent opportunities for interhuman interaction. And the only one that is there is with the third house, and that's with kin, and that's even a little bit subjective. The watery sign houses, are houses that are used for solving problems. And so there's a deficiency of problem solving, and the only problems that are solved are personal problems. So from all of this, we see that there is a very different character to the northern hemisphere, because when we look at the southern hemisphere, we see just the inverse. There are two airy sign houses, two watery sign houses, and only one fire and one earth sign. So there is, we get the whole idea that there is more of an interaction with others in the southern hemisphere, and those interactions are not with blood relations, but they're with partners or partnerships and with friends, and there's more of a tendency to do problem solving, but the problems that are solved are shared problems, and the things that are weak are self-assertions or assertions, because the ninth house really is a universal assertion more than it is a self-assertion. So you can see that the self has much less to do with the southern hemisphere in a very personal way. Now, if we take and make a composite of all of these things that we've gotten from the direct observation of nature, the indirect observation of nature, bounds and heart analysis, and the accentuation and deficiency analysis, we come up with something like this. I didn't get time to put together a handout. We'll get that all next time before the assignment. We have, for the north, is egocentric. The south, correspondingly, is universalistic. The north is microcosmic. The south is macrocosmic. So if there are more planets in the In the north, the person is going to spend more of their time and more of their attention taking care of opportunities that have to do with the personal microcosm than with the affairs of the world. The south is a bit more particular. The north is a bit more particular and the south is a bit more general. The south is more objective, the north is more subjective. The north has more to do with practical application, the south has more to do with theory. The north is more consolidating and the south is more expanding. So the first 6 houses are more personal, the second 6 are more impersonal. You can just say self and other. So you can see what we're trying to get at with these things. I gotta get some on. We do the same thing now with the east versus the west. And look at this, use the same methods of analysis. Using the direct analysis, in the east, there's also a clear distinction from watching the sun. It's not as clear as the north and south distinction. East, it is rising. It's climbing. It's asserting. And it's ascending. So like there is a quality of self-assertion about the east. When the sun is in the west, it's setting, it's falling, it's descending. Even if you look at the work that you do, there's much more vigor in the morning. In the afternoon, you're thinking of ways that you can sort of leak out on things. There's a big exertion in the morning, and after that, you're trying to rest. The energy is you're trying to retrieve there. All right, if we follow from the zodiac, when the sun is in the signs from Capricorn through Gemini, the days are getting longer. That is, when the sun is in these, on the east side of the chart, in the signs, the days are getting longer. And so there is something of an externalization and a consolidation in that externalization. In fact, if you have, especially the heart of the Eastern Hemisphere, if you have Pisces or Aries rising, you have signs of long ascension. It takes around the boundary between Pisces and Aries, if that's rising, that part of the zodiac takes longer to rise than any other part. So the midheaven is moving faster. And by progression, when the midheaven moves faster than the ascendant, since the midheaven deals with the spiritual vertical rather than the material horizontal, when the midheaven moves faster than the ascendant, the life is more spiritual. And when the ascendant moves faster than the midheaven, then the life is more material than spiritual. So when the eastern signs are rising, things are definitely being more crystallized because the signs of long ascension are there. Yes.
Say that again. Start.
When the sun is in the eastern part of the zodiac, the eastern half of the zodiac, it is externalizing itself. And when it is doing that, it is more taking from the spirit and breathing out and consolidating and materializing. And on the other half, it's turning in. All right. The days are shortening in the western side, so it feels like light and life and everything is slipping away on you. And so there is, again, a period of active assertion and not so active withdrawal. And we get the same feeling from the indirect looking at the zodiac that we did looking at the houses directly by watching the sun every day. If we do a bounds and heart analysis, we find that the East begins with Capricorn, or the 10th house. And the 10th house is all about goals and achievement and worldly preferment. And that tendency tapers off by Gemini, by the 3rd house, where one is adapting and not doing a good deal more than that. The heart of the Eastern Hemisphere is the ascendant. And the ascendant is where we initiate things. The auto-initiation. You find somebody with the sun on the ascendant or in the 1st house, it is somebody who is a self-made person. On the other hand, when we look at the Western Hemisphere, it begins with the very subjective and retiring 4th house, and it ends up with Sagittarius, which is sort of like with the 9th house, which is, like you're seeking foreign travel and the good for others and things like that, but it's all for others, the withdrawal. The heart of it is the cusp of the 7th house, and the cusp of the 7th house is, again, you first. Cooperation, compromise, find somebody with the sun in the 7th house, and they are a spouse-made person. And there is something that, in the same way that this is asserting, the way the 7th house cusp works, it's leading you on. It's like the ancient thing that they attribute to the Chinese. I don't know whether it's true or not. I think it's probably just some wag dreamed it up and said it with the Chinese. It says, a man chases a woman until she catches him. Meaning to say there is that Cleopatra-like thing. In fact, I've decided I'm going to do Antony and Cleopatra in the Shakespeare class this spring because I like the character so much. But it's like the whole Doppler effect. Things get weaker as they're pulling away from you, or so they seem, until you try to catch them. So catch me if you can. The East is like the old statement, Moses goes to the mountain, and the West is like the other half of the statement, the mountain goes to Moses. It depends on what culture you're in. If you're in the Islamic culture, they say, Muhammad goes to the mountain, or the mountain goes to Muhammad. They both had mountains figure in their lives, so we won't bicker. But you get the idea that there's a different flavor when you look at the bounds and especially at the heart. Looking at the accentuation and deficiency, the East has 2 earth and 2 air and 1 water and 1 fire sign house. So it indicates an accentuation on pragmatic or tangible accomplishment from the earth sign houses, and it indicates a tendency to cooperate, or to, cooperate isn't quite the right word, to organize people and things in order to attain those ends. Fire and water are more creative, and if you're being pragmatic, there isn't time for creativity, so it shows that there's a deficiency there. In the West, there is more fire and water and less earth and air. So there are more opportunities for creativity and more opportunities to withdraw and solve problems, but not a lot of dry, formal organization. What there is around the heart, but not a whole lot. So we put these all together again. We get a set of matching words. We find the East is self-reliant. The West is cooperative. The East tends to be independent. The West tends to be dependent. The East is self-initiating. The West is other-initiating. It reacts more, or it reflects. The East is more self-engrossed. The West is more responsive. The East is more vigorous, and the West is more easing and refining. The East is more crystallizing. The west is more decrystallizing. The east is more generative. The west is more regenerative. The east is sees things more on the incline. The west sees things more on a decline. East is struggle. West is ease. East is budding. West is disintegrating. So we count the number east and the number west. Now I've got a couple of notes here, about 4 notes when you start doing the tests and profiles. Number 1, you can't use the ascendant and midheaven, just the planets. We can only use the active significators. That means that these tests we don't have some of those same biases or another angle to get on. There's no way that you can put it in the profile, but if planets are in the east, but they're near the bounds, they're not quite as significant. So you just have to keep that in mind, especially if they're at the trailing edge, like something in the 3rd house or something in the 9th house is going to be less eastern or western than something like in the right near the ascendant or the descendant. It's just something to keep in mind. Again, to keep in mind, we're dealing with the broadest of the broad, and this is, we can get a lot of information from this, but it's, again, broad information and it's not detailed. And again, when we're looking at the tests and profiles, we're looking for balance. Balance is likely to be healthy. All right, we'll get to see a lot of things when we start applying this.
So planets on the bounds, even if it's they're at the beginning.
If at the leading edge, like in the 4th house or the 10th house, they're a little bit more strong for that hemisphere. But nonetheless, at the bounds, they're not real strong. If you're looking, the heart of it is always the strongest. That's where it is most itself. In fact, you could almost do an analysis just on the heart alone of each of the 4 hemispheres that we've looked at. All right, hold on. We're going to do all of this like this. All right, this is east and west. This is north and south. Didn't need it. Boy, what great pictures. All right, now we have the quadrant test. And that's the second last one that we're going to speak of. We're not going to do the other test, but we're going to talk about it. This is dividing all of opportunity space into 4 equal-sized quadrants. Again, there are 3 different ways it can be done. But we won't go through that all that tediously again. We'll just say that what we do is combine the 2 hemispheres that we have, and we get the quadrants. This is called the 1st quadrant, 2nd quadrant, 3rd quadrant, 4th quadrant. It's 180 degrees from the way the mathematicians do it. The mathematicians call this the 1st quadrant, but they're out in la-la land because everything they do is arbitrary. They don't even look at sunrise because they've been up all night dreaming. Yeah. Different systems of quadrants have been used by different astrologers. We won't go into that. That's just too tedious. All right. Let's first look at a method of analysis that is a composite. If we superimpose the northern and southern and the eastern and western on each other, then the 1st quadrant is southeast. The 2nd quadrant is northeast. What am I doing here? northeast, northwest, southwest, southeast. So all of the keywords that I didn't pass out to you because I couldn't get to it, you can take one from each contributor and put them together, and it gives you something of an idea of what each quadrant is like. It's like a composite of things. So if you take like north and east, if you take the keyword personal for the north and east struggle, so the first quadrant is a quadrant of personal struggle. Microcosmic self-initiation, subjective accomplishment or personal accomplishment. Moving to the second quadrant, individual ease, like the fifth house, playing. Consolidating responsiveness or egocentric dependencies. Parents need the kids as much as the kids need the parents. Consolidating responsiveness. I'm doing this for you. Consolidated response is giving you a gift. Egocentric dependencies. When you have all the words, you can put them all together yourself. It's something that you can do when you want to rest your eyes from reading all the biographies. I have so much fun with this. If you guys never read biographies, I'll have plenty of fun with it. Looking at the southwest, yes, the third is universal decrystallization. I guess you might call that death. We all die and we all get decrystallized. Regenerative theory or disintegrating expansion. Everything gets thinned out. The fourth is macrocosmic accomplishment. Woo. See, the words fit together just nicely. They really describe what happens in the quadrant. Expansive generation or self-reliant objectivity. Now, if we look at the sun in each of the quadrants directly, a direct observation of nature, we see in the first quadrant the sun is rising, but it is still beneath the earth. So it's something like, it's like a hidden struggle. The underground basis, the necessities, the unseen necessities are being taken care of before things can go into the fourth quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, the sun is rising and it's visible in its glory. It's hard work, but it mounts up to success. It mounts up to acclaim. It's visible. In the third quadrant, things are beginning to slip. We're beginning to tire. We're beginning to flag. But we take time and we perfect things more. We improve on them. There's right before sunset, there's sentiment, and we're much more willing to compromise, because none of us will never let the sun set on your anger, as that old statement goes. We're all willing. In the fourth quadrant, we sup, we relax, we amuse ourselves, and we educate. We have a hobby, everything, we're going down. It's just when you put kids down, that's the word that they literally use. They're just like the sun. If we use the indirect method, from the zodiac, the first quadrant is spring-like. Things charge forth. There's accumulation from new growth. The trees extend themselves just like the people. In the second quadrant, it's like summer. Person is personally fruitful, family is fruitful, expressive. Everybody has their task to take care of. The third quadrant reinforces the harvest-like qualities of autumn. Things are broken down. Things are gleaned out, which is a form of refinement. In the fourth, it's like winter. Again, we're most freed from the material things, from the active material things that have to be done, except if you've got to shovel the walks, but you can do more social things. Yes?
I'm just wondering if you misspoke when you pointed to the second quadrant and called it the fourth prior to this.
Or I may have. No, I went around from first to fourth to third to second.
And you called it fourth.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I may have made that mistake. We can go back on the tape and see. He never lets anything slip. He's the most careful person. If you're doing a mechanical job or building something or something like that, you better be prepared to take your time, because any possible thing that you could ever think of going wrong, he's already thought of it, and he's got 4 ways to prevent it and to have a fail-safe if the 4 ways don't work. And he even sees things that you wouldn't believe could go wrong. That's not a criticism. Not a criticism. I don't think he's going to be in an automobile accident unless somebody else is the fault. Correct? You've never been in one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The bounds and heart analysis works here also. The bounds of the first quadrant are the first and the third houses. So it's beginnings to elementary tools, from startup to having your tools together, and the heart of it is basic needs or basic resources. So that's a needs quadrant. The second quadrant begins with the fourth house, nurture, and it extends to the sixth house, care. So it is something, again, it's an intimacy kind of house where you're caring about things, but it's the fundamental expression that's at the heart. It's the children that count. In the third quadrant, it starts with the seventh and the ninth, and those are cultural houses that begin with the fine arts and end up with religion and philosophy. There are also the social justice houses. They begin with lawsuits versus judicial attitudes in the ninth house. And right in the heart of it is the shared needs. Everybody pays taxes, and the taxes get spent on everybody, including the large corporations. Something, the idea is right, but people can skew it, because the large corporations are individuals just like you and I. Did you ever try to wrestle with an individual that big and that strong? And it's not quite an individual, because a corporation is a soulless entity. It is, by its very legal definition, it does not have a soul in it, and therefore it is not responsible. That's going to come out in the whole Enron thing. Who are you going to nail? You can't nail individuals, because the corporation is a soulless entity. It's not you individually are responsible. Fourth quadrant. In the bounds, you have the 10th, social needs or social responsibilities, and then you have duties in the 12th house. So it is an accomplishment and a fatal finalization. And the thing in the heart of it is universal relationships, backslapping associates and friends and things like that, universal equality. Now, when we start doing an accentuation and deficiency analysis, it's stand out. Like in the first quadrant, there's a fire, an earth, and an air, but no watery sign house. In the second, there's a water, a fire, and an earth, but no air. So there's a really clear thing. And these are the opportunity versions of what we were calling in the element test, when we were looking at the attitudes, they're like atmospheres. These are atmospheres of opportunity. Now, here we take a long side trip. Not that long, because we're almost done for the night. We want to understand what is present and what is absent. So we're going to do a little epicycle, and we're going to look at the horoscope and divide it into, where did I put that nice white one? We're going to divide it into thirds. Because in thirds, there is one of each of the element houses. And that way we get an understanding of it. We could make a test and profile out of this, but it usually doesn't work out well. And we're going to come back. We'll get the effect of it when we come to the element-like test the next time around. The only analysis that we're going to do by thirds, we won't do a composite analysis, we won't do a direct nature analysis or an indirect, and we won't do a heart and bounds or any of those. We're going to do something else. We're going to do an evolutionary analysis. And in order to do that evolutionary analysis, I'm going to make some summary statements about what we've already picked up in general in the air. And some defining statements which will be verified as we go along. The first third of the house indicates opportunities that are personal. The second third of the horoscope represents opportunities that are shared. That's right. And the third of the horoscope indicates opportunities that are universal. So we have personal, shared, universal. If you like, you can also say body, soul, spirit. All right. The fiery sign houses indicate opportunities to assert or express or to educate. The earthy sign houses represent opportunities for responsibilities or profession or things like that. The airy sign houses represent opportunities to form relations with others, to organize relations. And the watery sign houses represent opportunities to cleanse or to solve problems. Now, there are other meanings which we will get at as we progress, in coming weeks. But right now, that's enough. So let's begin with the first house, which is firelight. That means it is a personal assertion. So the first house is like saying, I will do this. It's initiation. The second house represents the opportunities that accrue to that personal assertion, meaning to say, what do I need to get this done? What things do I need? The third house represents the basic organization that ties together assertions and relations. How am I assertions and responsibilities? How am I going to relate my initiative to its needs? How am I going to work it out? How am I going to do this? From all of this, from an assertion and the acquirement of stuff and the learning how to use it, one develops from all of those opportunities the residue of personal experiences. And before one can go on, that has to be cleansed. This is why our soil here never turns salt, because we always have distilled water falling. Whereas people who are in the desert and they only irrigate, pretty soon all the soil turns salt because they don't have that constant water washing the salt out. And so it's like that with opportunities. So the solution of personal problems, memories and hang-ups and bad habits and things like that in this active first third are like that. Then we start all over again. Now we're starting out with the second third of the horoscope, and that is a shared assertion. And that is, let's have kids. Can't do that alone. It's like a shared kind of thing. Out of that comes a division of labor, chores, and all those things that go along with all of those kinds of things. Who's going to do what around the house? Or how are we going to get this done? Then comes the very necessary sharing all together. How do we balance each other? How do we balance the load? How do we need each other? The compromise has to come in. So out of all of these things, shared problems develop. And in the 8th house is the solution of shared problems. That's couples counseling, or family counseling, or mediation, or divorce, or whatever you have to do. Like social workers who do a lot of small group work, or family counseling and things like that, usually have very strong 8th houses. Then we start all over again. You start out with the third, and you have a universal assertion. We hold these truths to be true for everyone. Our God is the only God, or this is good for everybody. Out of that comes a universal or a collective responsibility. What you owe to society. We have to honor the societal forms. We have to save the appearances. Out of that, when we have to deal with the state at large, then you come up with universal relations. Every citizen must participate in society. We say we're free, Aquarius-like free, because we can vote. And so the universal relationships, everybody here is a friend of mine, kind of a thing. And then finally, you have the solution of universal problems, problems that belong to all of society. If you need to know a law that's true to nature, you solve it in a lab. If you need to solve a spiritual problem, you solve it in a monastery. If it's an artistic problem, you solve it in a studio or an atelier or something like that. And if it is a real like it's a physical problem, you go to the hospital, or everybody has to have that centralized hospital. Moreover, the 12th house solves problems from everything all before it, even though there have been two cleansings along the way. The accruement of problems all around, when it becomes so faded that you can't not deal with it, that's also the 12th house. So now you have a little bit of an idea that how the assertions work, how the responsibilities work, how the associations work, and how the problem solvings work. Now we can go and we can look at the 4 quadrants. It was all just to build a women I'm supposed to like foreplay on.
So you've got 3 cleansings.
Yep.
In effect, you've got baptisms?
Yes. Yes. Each is a different one. You might say that you start sweating with the fiery sign houses, and you try the bird's method of dusting it off. It doesn't work. Then you try a fan so it doesn't smell so bad, and then finally you take your shower. Yes. So the first quadrant has fire, earth, and air. So it's a lot of busy work and a lot of things to get done, but it's a denial of the problems. So it's sort of helter-skelter, like a jack of all trades, and he's got a big toolbox, and very groundedly doing it all, but not taking any time to cleanse. The second quarter has water, fire, earth, and no air. So it has a lot of questions, a lot of expressions or assertions, and a lot of organization, but no impersonal integration or organization. So it's sort of like a lot of personal togetherness and nothing impersonal. It really is a family quadrant. What? Yes. Especially if you've got a lot of ego kids in there. The third quadrant, air, water, fire, no earth. A lot of compromise, all kinds of solutions, all kinds of ideals, no practical grounding. People are cared about, problems are cared about, universalization is cared about, but no works. It's sort of an irresponsible quadrant. It's a cultural quadrant. The fourth quadrant has earth, air, and water, but no fire. It's an old society by the time it gets to the fourth quarter. There's no fire left anymore. Everything's been put into objectives and taking care of all the problems and the communicants, and after things get old, there's no new assertions. It's a society bound. It's big on community, but it doesn't want to go always into new education. So putting these all together now, the first quadrant is personal initialization. The second quadrant is personal expression. The third quadrant is shared initialization. And the fourth quadrant is shared expression. The first quadrant is personal needs. The second quadrant is personal giving. The third quad is universal needs. The fourth quad is universal giving. First quadrant is acquisition. Second, expression. Third, culture. Fourth, synthesis. First, expression. The first is accomplishment, vigorous accomplishment. Second is ease. Third, regeneration. Fourth, totalitarian. The first is solidification. The second is intimate glory. The third is inquiry. And the fourth is fame or ignominy. First quadrant is basics. Second quadrant, intimacy. Third quadrant, sharing. Fourth, impersonal. First quadrant is helter-skelter. Second is hot and sticky. Third is destabilizing. And the fourth is societally captivated. Yes, you'll get a handout on all of this. But I'm just running them through so you can get the pictures in your mind of what they're like. The first quadrant is practical. The second quadrant is generative. The third quadrant is theoretical. And the fourth quadrant is generalizing. The test is you just count how many are in each profile. Again, you have problems with the edges, but because you have a smaller area, it's harder to make such distinctions. Next time, we'll talk about the non-contiguous divisions of opportunity space. But this talk, if anything, the real value of this talk is the different means of analyzing something. By directly looking at nature, by indirectly looking at nature, by looking at what is encapsulated in what the heart of the matter is, what it's strong in, what it's weak in, composites, and as an evolutionary process. Those are tools that you can use for understanding anything in life. It happens to be very good for something really simple like the structure and framework of the horoscope or the opportunity space. It's a very, very valuable thing. You have a pretty good insight. Again, what we're going through is painfully slow. When it all sinks in, you can just put these things down and take a look at it, and in a flash of a second, you have a feel for it. Or if you're doing something like a cross-profiling, you know how you can draw things out and you can understand what the basis is for a person's behavior. Good. Thank you very much. Questions?